how ignorant and stupid can you be if you really believe that trying to take carbon dioxide out of the air, which is making plants grow, is a good idea? Not only that, but it's actually an extremely energy and costly, expensive process to do.
This episode is the second half of Angela's interview with Ed Hoskins. I recommend that you watch our previous episode, linked in the description, for further context and more insight.
Your depiction of CO₂ saturation is a cornerstone of your presentation. Can you share how this scientific reality inspired you to challenge the foundations of climate alarmism and advocate for a more rational approach?
I saw that graph, we had it up earlier, the sort of yellow and blue one. And it just dawned on me that if that is actually reality, which I think it is, extra carbon dioxide is a non-problem. In fact, it is certainly not a pollutant, and it's certainly not unclean. You know, they talk about clean generation and clean renewables and this and that and the other. This utter nonsense, and very expensive utter nonsense. This is just a simple slide just to explain the levels of saturation at different levels of concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So you can see that what's left is about 29% at the moment, 71 to 29. If we went up to equilibrium, Climate 70, it would be 85-ish. And at the level that they feed plants with carbon dioxide in greenhouses, it's very important. And that gives you saturated all but 6%. And by the time you get to the levels at which plants evolve, then is nothing, is nil. It's totally saturated.
In your presentation, you referenced CO₂ Coalition Chairman Dr. William Happer's work to emphasize the negligible effect of doubling CO₂. How has his research influenced your perspective, and why is his message so critical for countering climate fear?
Sadly, I think an awful lot of the scientific community, mainly because they're paid by the state, has joined in on the climate alarmism bandwagon, as it were. If you're not a climate alarmist, you don't get a grant, certainly has been the effect. However, when you think about what Will Happer actually did, he worked out how to focus lasers on incoming missiles through the atmosphere. And that was in the time of Reagan and Star Wars. And he was agreeably surprised that when his theory actually worked in practice, in order to focus a laser, if it goes through the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is not consistent, it breaks up the beam. Happer knew about this, and he's a specialist in atmospheric transmission and so on and so forth. And so they found out that you could refocus the mirror of a laser to killer which would focus properly on an incoming missile. And you could actually make a mirror that you could distort very slightly. He called it a rubber mirror. And that distortion undid the distortion that was resulting from the passage through the atmosphere. And to do that, you needed a source in the direction you want to point your laser. So he said, yes, I know how to do that. We can make sodium guide stars. Apparently there's a layer of sodium atoms in the upper atmosphere, and you can excite some of those and you can make a consistent star. And that's what you needed to compare with and to calibrate the rubber mirror. And he did all that. And frankly, somebody who knows how to do that, I take much more seriously than an awful lot of the scientific establishment who have been, in the best possible way, who have been bought, basically, because people like Michael Mann and lots of other scientific establishments across academia, right the way across the Western world, have basically been said, if you don't support the consensus, you won't get a grant. And it's been a corruption like that. And very sadly, they have caused an awful lot of money to be wasted. If you want to destroy the economies of the Western world, it's a very, very good way of doing it. It just explains how marginal the additional doubling CO₂ is in reality. And this is seriously accurate science. And it's the difference between the black line and the red line underneath it. And that it's a 1% effect. So totally marginal for doubling CO2. And these are the grand old men of physics and early science. Look at the dates on them, 1850 to 1940. These guys were the foundations of physics in physical science, and they actually knew what they were talking about. He says, just for that marginal 1% difference, we're expected to give up our liberty, give up our cars, give up all the best benefits of Western industrial society, which are magnificent and need to be spread right the way across the undeveloped world, and submit to government controls. And for that, as he said, don't let anybody convince you that this is a good bargain. It is a terrible bargain. And it's already being enacted now.
Your focus on global greening showcases the remarkable benefits of higher CO2 levels for plant life. Can you share specific examples of how this greening is transforming ecosystems and boosting global food production?
NASA reckons that since 1950, leaf coverage in the world, because they take satellite pictures of it, leaf coverage in the world has increased by 15%. And that is enormous. That is another continent the size of the United States in extra greenery. And that's primarily, well, down to two things. It's primarily to do with better farming procedures, better fertilizers, but mostly it's to do with the fertilization effect of extra carbon dioxide. This is just to make the point. I don't know whether you've noticed it where you are, but this year, vegetation everywhere where I live has gone absolutely mad. It's really been very, very productive. And, I look at a bunch of plane trees opposite me in my house here, and they have been incredibly productive, grown faster than I've ever seen them grow. I've been here 25 years watching them. And the growth of greenery is unbelievably positive. And of course, that means there's more food in the world to feed a lot of people.
Ed, you make an interesting case that colder oceans naturally sequester CO2, potentially threatening plant survival in future glaciations. How does this long-term perspective highlight the absurdity of trying to reduce atmospheric CO2 today?
It just shows that the people who are trying to promote it have forgotten the biology that they should have learned when they were 8. But the mechanism is very interesting. First of all, colder oceans can absorb more carbon dioxide. They've been getting a little bit warmer, and that's one of the major reasons why the carbon dioxide level has actually increased over the last few centuries. And the other thing is that things like mussels and crabs absorb carbon dioxide in the water and turn it into their exoskeletons, their shells, basically. And that is a process. They are taking carbon dioxide out of the water and turning it into calcium carbonate, which is the White Cliffs of Dover, or whether it's any limestone. Limestones have all come from out of the ocean by this sort of process, by a process of life. And you can't stop it. So that means that there are periodic interglacials like we're in now. We could well be coming towards the end of it. It's been going for 10, 12,000 years. They usually only last about that long. And then there's an interval of glaciation, which is roughly 100,000 years. And in that time, the oceans can absorb more CO2 out of the atmosphere. And if they do that, that can get sequestered permanently by sea life, like any seashells is the process. Then over the hundreds of millions of years, that turns into limestone. And it's gone and taken out of the atmosphere irrevocably. In one glaciation, it was a close-run thing. At the end of the last glaciation, we were only 20% above the level at which plants would have died terminally. And it can happen again. When the oceans get colder, they absorb more carbon dioxide, and crabs and mussels and just take it out convert that carbon dioxide in the sea into the calcium carbonate of their shells. It's an irreversible and inexorable process. All I'm saying is that someday, somewhen, hopefully long in the future, that process will kill the world because it will destroy the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And if there is no carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you can't have plants. And you haven't got plants, you're gone.
Your research and insight that human CO2 emissions might delay a catastrophic drop below the 150 parts per million plant survival threshold is significant. Now, can you explain how this positions fossil fuel as a potential protector of life on Earth?
It's very simple. The fossil fuels that we're using were laid down 300 million years ago. That was coal or more. And they've been sitting there, and that was sequestered carbon that had been taken out of the atmosphere when the atmospheric levels were very high, say 5,000 parts per million, as opposed to 400 today. Essentially, coal was created by very verdant forests dying, decaying, and being compressed and turned into coal. And if we burn coal, all we're doing is releasing carbon dioxide that was sequestered 300 million years ago. It may well be, I don't know whether it's true or not, but it may well be that will delay carbon dioxide falling below the terminal level of 150 parts per million. It could be for millennia, I don't know. But it's certainly a very positive result of burning fossil fuels, and it's certainly not a pollutant. It could extend life on Earth very substantially. I don't know the answer to that, but it's a possibility.
Can you share the most compelling examples of how these policies are harming nations like Germany and the UK?
If you want to generate power, and you can do it with nuclear or by burning fossil fuels, those processes are about 90% productive. They work 90% of the time. However, renewable energy, which is the thing that's thought to be clean and possibly going to run the world, solar energy in Europe rarely gets above 10% productivity. Onshore wind power gets to about 22%, and offshore wind power, which is extremely expensive to do, can get to almost 30% if you're lucky. But it's intermittent. You can't control it. You can't say, I need the power now and tell the wind to blow, if you understand what I mean. And you certainly can't turn the sun on in the middle of the night.
I also asked Ed if he could elaborate on why carbon capture and storage is such a misguided idea and how it ignores the biological benefits of CO2.
Well, how ignorant and stupid can you be if you really believe that trying to take carbon dioxide out of the air, which is making plants grow, is a good idea? Not only that, but it's actually an extremely energy and costly, expensive process to do. It costs in the UK, they're expecting to do a pilot study and spend £20 billion on it. £20 billion. And the UK is broke anyway. But they seem to be pretty determined to keep on going with that. And the amount of effect that you can have, the amount of carbon dioxide you can take out of the atmosphere or out of the smokestack of a fossil fuel plant is so small in comparison with the real problem and the whole of the atmosphere. It's utterly pointless. But these people don't seem to have any sense of proportion. They don't. They must have forgotten not only their elementary school biology, but also their elementary school mathematics, or arithmetic as it used to be called.
Including your presentation, your analogy to Sun Tzu's strategy, framing green energy policies as a Cold War against Western economies, is very thought-provoking. Can you expand on how these policies weaken the West and who might be benefiting from this dynamic?
This is my personal view on what's going on. Sun Tzu wrote about 40 arts of war. But the first art of war is try and subdue your enemy without fighting as an art of war. And that's what is happening by persuading Western governments to destroy their economies for a non-problem. I personally think that green should be considered as a direct continuation of the Cold War, nothing short of that. And that's my view, but I think it's a valid view.
Ed, I do hope you'll join us again soon on Climate Debrief. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. The Climate Debrief podcast is funded by listeners like you. If you enjoyed listening to this episode of Climate Debrief, please like, comment, and subscribe. We read all of your feedback. If you are interested in finding out more about the CO₂ Coalition and its mission, visit our website at co2coalition.org. Our host and executive producer is Angela Wheeler. Production by Ethan Audie and Scott Wheeler. Technical production and editing by Joseph von Spakovsky.